Financing life cycles, understanding organizations as organisms. Capital structure theory is difficult to understand. From Modigliani-Miller theory, capital structure is irrelevant in perfect market. Then we throw in various imperfections to explain various capital structure patterns in reality. These explanations are often plausible, but not very convincing. More generally, many of us find finance difficult to learn. We often don't have first-hand knowledge of financial operations of organizations. We often don't have intuition about financial concepts. But we are very familiar with our daily lives. Just think organizations as organisms. Finance and many other subjects will be much easier to connect. You might protest. Organizations are not organisms. Organisms will grow, mature, decline, and die. Organizations, if well managed, can last forever. An individual company might last for a long time. However, if you look at statistics, most companies also grow, mature, decline, and die. Credit rating as a measure of the health of a company. One way to measure the health of a company is its credit rating. An individual company's credit rating can improve over time, just like an individual health condition can improve over time, even when one gets older. However, statistically, the average credit rating of a cohort of companies will decline over time as these companies age. We will leave the detailed discussion on statistics to the appendix. Mode of financing or capital structure. Once we treat organizations as organisms, many problems in finance become very easy to understand. One problem is the mode of financing or capital structure. There are two main methods of financing: equity financing and debt financing. We also need to decide whether we shall retain earnings or distribute earnings as dividend. These questions are unfamiliar to most of us. We find them difficult to understand. But we can learn a lot from the finance methods of our own lives, which are more familiar to us. Financing life cycle for individuals. When we are small children, are we financed by parents or by bank loans? When you are 5 years old, your parents are entitled to think you as a future billionaire. But a bank won't be persuaded to loan you $1 million because of your future prospect. You have to be financed by your parents' money or equity. You can't be financed by loans from bank or debt. As you grow older and have a steady income yourselves, you can get mortgage loans from banks for your home purchase. You can get debt financing. When you have family and settle down, you have kids and distribute part of your earning to your next generation or other people. You distribute your incomes as dividends. This is the financing life cycle for individual persons. Financing life cycle for companies. From the evolution of financing method of individuals at different ages, we can understand corporate financing much easier. When a company is young, it requires heavy investment and has little earning. Few banks are willing to lend it money. It had to rely on owners' equity financing. As a company starts to generate earning, banks and capital markets will be confident enough to loan it funds for further expansion. This is debt financing. As a company matures, it generates steady streams of earnings, but its growth potential is small. It will distribute its earnings as dividends to fund growth opportunities elsewhere or other needs. This is the financing life cycle for individual companies. It is very similar to the financing life cycle for individual persons. Not every person follows the same financing cycle. Not every company follows the same financing cycle, but it is a common pattern. Product life cycle. We are more familiar with product life cycle. It may give us more intuition about financing life cycle. We'll use the production of cell phones to illustrate the phenomena of product life cycles. Analog cell phones were dominated by Motorola. Early digital phones were dominated by Nokia, a Finnish company with a long history in lumber business. Smartphones were pioneered by RIM, Research in Motion, which was once the largest Canadian company by market capitalization. Smartphones are called BlackBerry. They were once very popular. Few people remember RIM right now. Touchscreen smartphones are dominated by Apple and Android systems. Each new generation of cell phones is dominated by different companies. Why is that? When digital cell phones were developed, Motorola was the technical leader. However, Motorola was reluctant to push digital cell phones aggressively. There are two reasons. First, new digital phone market will cannibalize old analog phone market dominated by Motorola. It won't make much money by pushing digital phones, at least not in the early stages. Other companies with no analog phone business don't have the same baggage. Second, more importantly, the push for digital phones will accelerate the obsolescence of analog systems. This will accelerate obsolescence of knowledge and power of top management at Motorola. Today, Motorola is long gone. Nokia was absorbed by Microsoft with little to show in the cell phone market. BlackBerry, once everywhere, is a distant memory. The same happens to other dominant systems when new ideas, new technologies, and new theories occur. This is why life cycles occur at different systems, different scales. Few people remember Detroit was once the richest city in US. The life cycles of physical systems determine that financing methods will experience life cycles as well. Concluding remarks. Finance literature piles up many papers to explain why and how companies choose different modes of financing. Personally, I find the explanation of financing life cycle most illuminating. Once we think organizations as organisms, finance and other subjects will be less remote. They will be easier to understand. We might reflect on how MMM theory differs from the theory of life cycle financing. In MM theory, the default assumption that a company will live forever. Then we introduce various assumptions on market imperfection to explain reality. In life cycle theory, the default assumption is that life changes over time and the lifespan is finite. While many people seek to live on forever, few think their finite lifespan is caused by imperfection of the world. Possible presentation topics: study a case of long-term financing pattern of a company. Study a case of product life cycle. Is product life cycle related to financing life cycle? Appendix: transition probability matrix of debt ratings. Each year, rating companies such as Standard & Poor's and Moody's will summarize the change of credit rating of companies into a table. This table is called transition probability matrix. This is a typical transition probability matrix taken from Standard & Poor's. The table in the previous slide requires some explanation. In general, a company's credit rating can be from AAA to default. AAA is the highest credit rating, then AA, single A, triple B, double B, single B, triple C. Default is the lowest rating when a company defaults on its debt payment. The table is called transition probability matrix. It has 8 rows and 8 columns. The number at first row, first column is 0.908. This means on average there is a 0.908 probability that a AAA bond will remain AAA the next year. The number at the first row, second column is 0.083. This means on average there is a 8.3% probability that a AAA bond will become a AA bond the next year. One slippage in credit rating. The number at second row, first column is 0.001. This means, on average, there is 0.1% probability that a double A bond will become a triple A bond the next year, an enhancement in credit rating. The sum of all numbers in each row is 1, since the probabilities sum up to 1. Let's take another look at the transition probability matrix. So this matrix has 8 rows and 8 columns, and the sum of each row is 1 because the sum of probability is 1. We want to extract information about the long-term health of companies from the transition probability matrix. First, we look at transition probability between AAA and AA bond. Every year, there is a 0.083 or 8.3 probability AAA bond is downgraded to AA bond. Every year, there is a 0.1 probability the AA bond is upgraded to AAA bond. From this data, it seems that there is a trend of declining health of companies every year. Then we look at transition probabilities between triple B and double B bond. Every year, there is a 5.3 probability a triple B bond is downgraded to double B bond. Every year, there is 7.7 probability a double B bond is upgraded to triple B bond. From this data, it seems that there is a trend of slightly improving health of companies every year. From the transition probability matrix, we can't be certain whether the overall health of companies decline every year. To obtain clearer picture, we can multiply transition probability matrix multiple times to see the long-term result. It is easy to perform matrix multiplication with Excel. We can use the mmulti command. This is the result of the 64th power of the probability transition matrix. And this is still an 8 by 8 matrix, and the sum of each row is still 1 because that's the probability. Now let's look at the sum of each column. You can see that the sum of first column is quite small, right? The AAA is 0.11, and the sum of default is very high, is 5.1. If we look at the sum of each column for the original matrix, then roughly sum of each column is close to 1. But you see over time, the probability of default become higher and higher. From the table in the previous slide, we can find values are highly concentrated at the last column, the default column. The last row is sum of each column. From the iteration results, after 64 years, the majority of the companies from the cohort will default. Of course, we shouldn't interpret it too literally. It is possible that some companies, due to poor performance, have been acquired by other companies. Some companies, due to low credit rating, are unable to obtain or choose not to seek further funding from the debt market. But the overall deterioration of the health of companies toward default is unmistakable. The birth and spin-off of new companies that keep rejuvenate the overall economy. Similarly, the overall deterioration of the health of any cohort of population toward death is unmistakable. The birth of new people that keep rejuvenate the overall society. Excel file. For Excel calculations related to the transition probability matrix, please refer to the following file. You can download the file from this web link.